Geno Smith has been slinging it to kick off Seahawks training camp, but is he ready to elevate his game to elite quarterback status as Jarran Reed seems to think so? I'm going to be diving into that question and much more on a special edition mailbag of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A special thanks, as always, to all the 12s listening in. It's a bonus episode here on Sunday night. No training camp practice for the Seahawks today, but they will be back at it in the morning for their first padded practice. Heading into that practice, going to be just a second. Let's see if we got somebody banging on our walls here. Anyway, this bonus episode is brought to you by Game Time. Make sure to check out gametime.com, and that'll give you an opportunity to find all the top tickets at the lowest prices. And with Game Time's guarantee, you're always guaranteed to get the best price for every event, whether it's concerts, games, whatever your entertainment, you can always get the best prices at Game Time. So make sure to check that out. Let's get to our questions here. It is a special Sunday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm going to be diving into as many questions as we can on this show. And our first one here, this one's coming from Stanley D4591. What does Geno Smith have to do this season to truly be viewed as an elite quarterback like Jarran Reed called him? And this is a really good question because we've seen the production the last couple of years, 50 touchdown passes the last couple of years for Geno Smith. He was the comeback player of the year in 2022. Last year, numbers weren't quite on par. He finished first in completion percentage 2 years ago. Last year, dropped to the middle of the league. Touchdown passes dropped to the middle of the league. Quarterback rating dropped to the middle of the league. He did lead the league in game-winning drives, and he played better down the stretch. 9 touchdowns, only 2 interceptions the last couple of games, or last 6 games for the Seahawks last year. So if you can bottle up that 2022 production from Geno Smith, and you can find a way to get that or even better numbers this year in Ryan Grubb's offense, I will say this right now. If you can see Geno Smith play in regular season games the way that he's looked these first 4 practices at training camp, and again, they're not padded practices. You can't put too much stock into them. We'll see what things look like when the offensive line has to actually block full throttle defensive linemen coming after him. Geno Smith can have the time to throw the football, but if he can sling it with the quick release, the command that he has shown so far in Ryan Grubb's offense with all the talent he's got at receiver, tight end, running back, you name it, it presents a great opportunity for him to potentially have a season where he can get himself into that elite category of quarterbacks. He's looked that good these first 4 days, but he's going to have to go out there, throw for more than 30 touchdowns like he did a couple years ago. He's going to have to be near the top of the league in completion percentage, and the Seahawks have got to get to the playoffs, and they've got to win playoff games. If you want to be an elite quarterback, you got to go out there and you've got to win those games in January when everything is at stake. So that's really what I think needs to happen if he's going to elevate to that elite status. But he's looked really good here these first 4 days of training camp. Next question coming from Mind of Annex. Here, or have there been any murmurs about bringing back a guy like Quandre Diggs or a guy like Justin Simmons to add some depth at safety? So before training camp started, I had not heard any murmurs on any of these guys, but I did wonder if there was a possibility, if Quandre Diggs is not signed, maybe that Seattle could look into that possibility because Mike Macdonald likes to play 3 safety looks. But I would tell you right now, the chance of either one of those players coming in now, I would say, is 0%, unless you've got an injury. And knock on wood, you don't want that to happen. If somebody like Julian Love or Rayshon Jenkins got banged up with a significant injury, then maybe you would look into the possibility of a Justin Simmons or bringing back Quandre Diggs. But with where things stand right now, I don't see any way either one of those players is going to be jumping in a chance to be a third safety. And I don't see the Seahawks feeling like they need to go out and get a starting caliber safety. They like the 2 that they have. They like Kayvon Wallace. They just signed Marquise Blair. So Seattle feels pretty comfortable with their safety group, even if some fans aren't necessarily feeling the same way. I don't think we'll see either one of those guys in a Seahawks uniform. Next question here coming from John Denton Photo. You've been in the halls, stood at the sideline, seen the players, seen the coaches. What feels different this year to previous camps? I'm going to be honest here. This is going to be surprising, but the differences, really, there are not a ton of them, in my opinion. Obviously, Mike Macdonald and Pete Carroll are totally different coaches in how they carry themselves. But a lot of the philosophies that Pete Carroll brought with him to Seattle, Mike Macdonald shares a lot of those in the way that he wants to construct the roster, the types of players that he wants out there. They don't have identical personnel visions. And I think Mike Macdonald at this stage, his creativity, what he's able to do on defense, that was something that Pete Carroll had not been able to do the last few years as head coach. So there's some stark differences there. As far as what you've seen in the building, I think that there is, I don't want to say that it's a stricter approach, but it does feel like it is not quite as fun-oriented as what we've seen in recent years. Though if you listen to some of their meetings from across the media room when they're in the auditorium, it gets pretty loud in there. You can hear plenty of hooting and hollering. So I don't know that it's necessarily been the dramatic change in that regard. I think more on the field where you see a lot more drills that are structured a little bit more than we saw at Pete Carroll. Those are some of the differences, but I don't think that it's been that night and day difference as some fans were expecting. There's still a lot of similarities with the way the Seahawks are running things, and it still feels like the culture that was set by Pete Carroll, that Mike Macdonald's doing what he can to try to maintain that with some of his own wrinkles and ways that he handles things. But the players seem to be buying into what he's selling. Seems like he's a guy that players like to talk to. So I don't see this being that major difference between coaches here in the sense that suddenly, oh, this building is completely redefined. I would not go that far, to be honest with you. Our next question here, apparently Sam Howell is not doing great. Is this due to quarterback coach making changes to his throwing action, footwork, etc.? Have you seen anything? Also, thoughts on getting Tyler Huntley or DTR. So we're talking there about Dorian Thompson-Robinson in Cleveland. Getting one of those quarterbacks if they're cut. Huntley and DTR were not on the same team last year. They are this year. This coming from DK Wookie_1. So I can say this from being at practice. The big issue for Sam Howell these first 4 days, he's had a lot of issues with overthrowing the football way too high. He's airmailing throws. There's been a few that have gone into the ground. I thought he looked better yesterday. Still a lot of throws that he left in the field that he needs to be able to complete. But I spoke with a college coach for one of Seattle's incoming draft picks. I'm not going to outline which coach it was, but I spoke to one of those coaches who happened to be in attendance at Friday and Saturday's practice. And the discussion basically centered around fundamentals. And to me, and I would agree with this coach, I think right now, Sam Howell, it's pressing with this new offense. I don't think he feels very comfortable in it yet to this point. I think that the lack of security, the lack of confidence necessarily in where he's going with the football, that is transforming into accuracy issues that we don't normally see from him. When you watch on film, he didn't airmail very many throws in Washington. Again, yesterday I thought he looked better, but I think that you're seeing some habits manifest themselves in his throwing right now because he's not necessarily comfortable with this offense. So I think that as he continues to get reps, you're hoping that you're going to see that improve. And you did see a step forward on Saturday, maybe with the pads coming out. Sometimes quarterbacks throw better with pads on. There's certain guys that do. So maybe Howell is one of those players. We shall find out. But I think we saw some baby steps. But right now it seems like the offense more in general, just his comfort level, that is playing into the inaccuracy that we are seeing out there. Next question from Tony in Montana 1. After watching the first few days of camp, what are your overall thoughts on the influx of players to help fix our defense and O-line? So I want to start on the defensive side, the defensive line. We haven't got to see pads yet. That's going to end tomorrow. The wait is over. We finally get to see the pads tomorrow, which is going to be huge for both sides of the line of scrimmage. I will just throw that disclaimer. We have not seen pads yet, so the evaluation period is truly starting in tomorrow's practice. But you can see the athleticism with players like Byron Murphy and Johnathan Hankins surprises people. We're going to get to hear from him later in the show. But Johnathan Hankins, for being a big man, he moves pretty well. He is a good athlete for a player of his size, and you can see that in him. And off the edge, there's been a couple of these new guys. Nelson Caesar's a player that's certainly been interesting. But I think when you're looking at the linebacker position, that is really where the newcomers fit in that I want to talk about instead of the D-line. I know the question was staged at that, but The only real addition on that D-line is Byron Murphy II, which everybody knows he is a huge addition. But the linebackers, getting to see Jerome Baker and Tyrell Dodson out there, I've been really impressed with how they're moving, and they're getting a lot more snaps than I thought they were going to early in camp coming off injury. Not a lot of limitations. They did give Baker 1 day off. I think Dodson will probably have that happen soon just to make sure these guys stay healthy. But I've been really impressed by what I've seen from those guys. We'll see what things look like with the pads on. And then Rayshawn Jenkins has been an excellent addition at safety. You can already see how he's fitting in defense and the way that he is commanding with his communication presence back there. I feel like a lot of these new additions so far, and we'll see what things look like with pads. I think those new additions are going to look pretty good for the Seahawks on the defensive side of the ball. As for the O-line, this is the position group that's the toughest to evaluate up to this point, because you really haven't gotten to see, other than hitting sleds, you're not getting to see these guys get to work. The O-line tomorrow, I'm so excited to see what this group looks like. And as far as the additions go, this will be our first real chance to see what Christian Haynes can bring to the table, what Oluwatimi can do as the starter now at center. How does Laken Tomlinson fit in? I've loved what I've seen from Tomlinson to this point, especially with just the mentorship that he's bringing these young guys. George Fant, the experience, and now the mentorship that he can bring in his second stint with the Seahawks. But those guys, until we see them actually blocking and hitting defenders, which we finally get to see some tomorrow, it's pretty tough to gauge. I feel like on defense, you can at least see the movement skills with some of these guys at the second and third level, and you can start to see where these pieces are fitting in for the Seahawks. Real quick, our final question here for this segment. The Seahawks look very deep at corner. Do you think they could trade Artie Burns or Mike Jackson in order to add elsewhere? This question coming from Skiff Feldspar on X. I will be honest here about Artie Burns. I don't see Artie Burns, even though I think he's had a good camp. That's not a player that teams are going to be rushing to make a trade for. They're going to wait till the Seahawks cut him, and then they're going to see if they can pick him up either off waivers or sign him outright. That is a player that has been living on one-year contracts. He's now in the middle of his career. Somebody that isn't going to be commanding a trade with another player coming back in return, most likely. Mike Jackson is the one of these two players that I could see something happening. A team like maybe the Minnesota Vikings that has lost a starting corner in Mekhi Blackman to a torn ACL. That could be a team that is calling the Seahawks down the line saying, hey, we want to add another corner. Is Mike Jackson available? Maybe you can get a late round pick. Maybe there's a position the Vikings are deep at that the Seahawks could use some help. That's the kind of trade that I could see happening when we get closer to the end of training camp of the preseason. Schneider's made deals like that. At this point, though, if I had to predict, I think that both those guys, if they're going to be on Seattle's roster, I expect Mike Jackson's going to be here. Maybe Artie Burns is. I don't see a trade happening on that front, sending either one of those players. When I come back, I'm going to continue answering your questions here on this bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be right back. This bonus episode of Locked On Seahawks is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy. It also keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether it's superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, steering wheel covers, windshield wiper fluid, whatever you're looking for. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home the win. Keep your ride or die alive. ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Welcome back to the bonus edition of Locked On Seahawks here on Sunday night. The Seahawks were off today, but that doesn't mean we can't talk Seahawks football. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined by all of you that are tuning in, whether you're in nearby Tacoma, Washington, or over in Paris, France, in the land of the Olympics. We got some Olympic viewers in town that are going to be tuning in here in today's show. Special thanks to all of you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Diving into a special Sunday night mailbag with all the training camp practices. We haven't had time to answer your questions, and our listeners have been dishing out a ton of them. Let's continue with our questions here in part 2. Question from the Pear Tree Man. What's going on with Tyler Lockett? Well, what is going on with Tyler Lockett? I didn't know there was anything going on with Tyler Lockett. And the reason I'm saying that is he looks like Tyler Lockett out there. Number 16 is catching a bunch of passes. I know there was debate on Friday about whether or not he was able to maintain control of the football on that diving touchdown. I'm not so sure now. I wish I could see another angle of that play. When I was watching from the sideline at training camp, I thought for sure it was an incompletion, but the video that the Seahawks shared had enough ambiguity. I'd like to see another view to see whether or not he was able to get control of that football before he was able to get to the ground. He has had a really good camp. He's looked like Tyler Lockett. He's getting open. Geno Smith's getting the football to him. Maybe we're sleeping on him a little bit this year because he didn't have as productive a season last year. Jackson Smith and Jigba continues his ascent. Maybe Tyler Lockett's going to be more productive than people are realizing here as he goes into his 10th season. The guy has just been year in, year out, Mr. Consistent. He's always been reliable. And that's what he's looked like out here. So as far as what's up with Tyler Lockett, he looks like Tyler Lockett to me. I don't see any significant differences from the past. Our next question from Dean Christopher on Threads. Do you think it was a good move to sign Marquise Blair and cut Johnathan Sutherland? So, look, Johnathan Sutherland has not been getting a lot of opportunities, and I think his biggest advocate was Pete Carroll. So not having Pete Carroll here, Mike Macdonald, he's got slightly different personnel that he is looking for at the safety position. John Schneider has always been a fan of Marquise Blair, and Blair is in that Rashad Penny class. He's a player that I thought showed some promise his first time in Seattle, and he just could not stay healthy. Constant injuries, and heck, he had an Achilles injury last year that prevented him from playing for anybody in 2023. So he's got an uphill climb to make this football team, but at the same time, if he's healthy, Marquise Blair is a more talented football player than Johnathan Sutherland. And he's got some positional flexibility. He's played some nickel. He's played that big nickel safety position. He's played both safety spots. And he's going to come up and stick people. At minimum, he can give you someone that can compete on special teams. And he's going to push players like Kobe Bryant and Ty Okada. I don't know if he makes his football team, but I think that this is one of those situations where talent, pure talent alone, it's worth making this move. If you did not think Johnathan Sutherland had a chance to make this team, bring somebody in that maybe does. And Marquise Blair, he's got locker room backing. The team has a lot of guys that played with him a few years ago still. And so he is somebody that everybody's excited to see back in the building and they're rooting for. So I think this is one of those low risk, potentially high reward moves because this is a talented player if he can stay healthy, which has been a huge issue throughout his career to this point. Our next question, sticking with Geno Smith. He is obviously the quarterback. Going to be a lot of discussion. Do you have a read on the front office's opinion of Geno Smith? It sounds like he's killing it, and I would like them to extend him long term, especially with where the QB market is at. But I get the impression that the front office isn't high on him. This is coming from Axel MTG on X. I'm going to push back on that a little bit. This might not be what a lot of fans think, but I think John Schneider is very high on Geno Smith. And I understand he's 33 going on 34, but he didn't start for a number of years. He is a young 33. If he really lets it rip in this offense, which he has done these first 4 days of training camp, if he does that in the regular season, Seattle gets back to the playoffs, wins a playoff game, I'm not ruling out the possibility that Geno Smith could be the quarterback for several more years in Seattle. I think everything's in front of him to go get it. And I don't think John Schneider is in a position where he's just thinking, you know what, with his contract, I don't care what happens next year. I'm going to have Sam Howell or another quarterback playing. I don't think he's backed himself into that corner at all. So, maybe Seattle ultimately wants that younger quarterback, but you know what? Geno Smith's got locker room backing. This is a guy that's developed into a great leader. He's got a lot of the skills that quarterbacks that play well into their late 30s have. He's a pocket passer, quick release, can throw the ball downfield, handles the offense really well, really accurate. So I think that it's a very pivotal season for him, but I'm not going to sit here and say this front office isn't high on him. I think that the Sam Howell move, they were trying to look for a really good backup that had starter potential, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're saying, well, this is just our sign. We're moving on from Geno Smith. A lot is going to happen for that to be the case. And so I think that this is a front office is still pretty high on him. Does that mean they're high enough that they want him to be their quarterback the next 3 or 4 years? He has to go out and earn that this year for the Seahawks. Salvo Truco 503 on X. Can Tyrese Knight be a surprising impact player at the linebacker position for Mike Macdonald's defense, or is it a Dotson-Baker duo that is a lock to start in week 1? Now that we've seen Dotson and Baker both on the field, I'm pretty confident. I'm 99% confident those are going to be the 2 starters in week 1. But I still think that there is a chance, a pretty good chance. We'll see what Tyrese Knight looks like when the pads come on. He looks more and more comfortable by day in Mike Macdonald's defense. I love the movement skills. He had a play the other day. Ken Walker III caught a ball in the flats, and he ended up catching him like yard after he caught the ball. Incredible pursuit angle, really good speed. I like the athletic traits. I like the tackling ability. Can he mesh with the defense? That's the big key. I could see a situation still down the road in this first season as a rookie where Tyrese Knight sees snaps on defense. We'll see how those other 2 players perform, but I expect Baker and Dotson to start week 1, start several games early in the season. I could see Tyrese Knight finding his way into the lineup, though, at some point this season. Our next question from Home Chicks on X, what are some of the UDFAs looking like? For example, the running backs, Nelson Caesar, Hayden Haddon. Some of these guys, we're going to have to wait till the pads have come out. Nelson Caesar is the one that jumps to my mind. I've been pretty impressed with what I've seen from him to this point. He has been active. He's gotten in the backfield some, but there's no pads. The offensive line cannot fully engage. Let's see what Nelson Caesar looks like when he's in pads. Can he bring the physicality that he did at Houston? Is it going to show up in those team drills? If it does, then he's certainly a guy that could be in the peripheral to make this roster. Hayden Haddon's made some nice catches, but there's so much depth in front of him. He's had a really hard time standing out at that receiver position. George Halani is the one that I'm most curious to watch, along with Jack Westover, 2 offensive guys that could potentially play their way onto this roster. Halani, I think, has a good chance to push Kenny McIntosh. The running backs to this point, it's a wash as far as evaluation. We get to see what they look like with pads on, but George Halani looks the part of an NFL running back. You can see the soft hands. How does it progress with the pads on? We'll have to wait and see. Jack Westover, knowing the offense already for Ryan Grubb, there's a lot of things to like about his chances to potentially make things interesting. His key is special teams to make this team. If you're going to keep a 4th tight end, you've got to be somebody that's a core special teams player. Westover has the athleticism and the toughness to be able to do that. So this is still a very ongoing evaluative process. With the pads coming on, this is when we really get to see which undrafted free agents can stand out and give themselves a chance to make this football team. One more question here, and this one coming from Morris Bubba. The offensive line has had several high draft picks. Are the players just not as good as the organization thought on draft day, or are there coaching or QB issues making them look less successful? So the QB thing, the QBs have made them look more successful. I mean, Geno Smith especially, his ability to turn pressure into completions last year, he was as good as any quarterback in the NFL at doing that. The coaching staff, on the other hand, I think this new coaching staff with Scott Huff being the O-line coach, I have been really impressed by everything I've seen from the first practice he was out there, just how detail-oriented he is, fundamentals-oriented. This team needed that on the offensive line. So I think that the coaching has been the biggest difference here, and injuries have been a factor too. I mean, Abe Lucas missing all but 6 games last year, that is always going to stunt development some. So you're hoping you can get him on the field soon off the PUP list, get him back out there playing like he did his rookie season, suggested he could be a top 10 right tackle. You got to have your line stay healthy, and you got to hope somebody like a Christian Haynes is going to pan out. I still think the drafting the last few years has been better. Anthony Bradford started 10 games. It was very up and down, but they've at least been able to bring in some guys that have some talent, and there have been flashes. Can the new coaching staff put everything together and really get this group playing well as a cohesive unit? To me, the coaching is the biggest difference here, along with health for this offensive line. All right, let's switch gears now, moving away from the questions, as we've been doing each and every episode since training camp opened. Grateful to have the opportunity to speak with a number of Seahawk players at the VMAC, and maybe one of the most entertaining interviews that I've had to this point. Johnathan Hankins coming over from the Dallas Cowboys, really smart guy that has played a lot of snaps in the NFL. Coming over with Adden Durde, who was his defensive line coach the last 2 years in Dallas. Those two have a very strong bond. And Hankins, he loved what he saw from the personnel that the Seahawks had. He's been following Mike Macdonald from afar. So I was really curious to see what he thought this Seahawks defense could accomplish after playing for a top 5 defense with the Dallas Cowboys a year ago. Had a chance to ask him about that and much more. Take a listen to my exclusive interview with Johnathan Hankins from the VMAC. Here we roll.
How you been doing, man? First training camp here with the Seahawks. What's it like being in the Pacific Northwest? Probably a little different than everywhere else you've played.
Very different, very different. But the views, the greenery, the lake, it's probably the best facility I've probably been at. So I'm excited.
You get to play for Adden Durde again. And I'll admit, I was watching last year. I haven't watched a ton of the Hard Knocks stuff over the years, but I had to watch a few years ago with when the Cowboys were on there. Just hearing, just catching a British dude yelling stuff out there. Then what is that like getting to play for him, and how is he different from some of the other coaches that you've had a chance to play for?
He's an exciting coach, man. He definitely brings the joy to the room. He brings the fun, the excitement. Just when we're out there on the field and doing drills, he's such an energizer guy, coach, and just the way, his British slang or talk that he gives out, it kind of throws you off. But after a while, you kind of get used to it, you embrace it, and then for some reason, people tend to start to try to talk like him, and it never really works out or come out how it's supposed to. But all in all, man, he's a fantastic coach, man, great motivator, and a lot of dudes just love to play for him and play with him.
It's a little easier to stay on your guard when you have somebody with that different accent that like no one else in the NFL has.
Yeah, it's definitely different. But that just goes to show you, football is branching out all over the country and everywhere. And, him being a guy that played football and understanding the game just makes it a lot more, relatable when he's teaching us and getting us to where we need to be.
I don't know if you've had other defensive coordinators that had a defensive line background, but now that he's jumping into that role as a defensive lineman, how nice is that to have a defensive coordinator that still is very hands-on with your position?
I love it. I like it because, absolutely, being in the trenches, you always want some guys or a coach that, understand and gives what it feels like to be there, but for him to be in total control of the defense, he know for a fact that it starts with the defensive line and on back. So it's definitely nice to have, a D coordinator that understands that and understands the whole unit, the whole scheme. And I think it'll be very beneficial for us this year.
And the interesting thing with this situation, obviously, Adden Durde being here, that probably was one of the big factors for you coming to Seattle.
Yeah.
But you've also got an intuitive defensive coordinator, and now as the head coach, Mike Macdonald.
Yeah.
What's that process been like for you getting to adapt? Obviously, you're familiar with Adden Durde, but this is not necessarily his scheme.
Yeah.
What's that process been like?
It's been quite interesting. For the past 2-3 years, when he was in Baltimore, I was always fascinated about their defense and how dominant they were. And to come to find out he was becoming the head coach here, and AD came here, and we was going to be able to, partner or, embrace both, defensive terminology. I was excited, and he brings so much to the defensive side. It's kind of hard to explain because it's pretty complex, but at the same time, it's very exciting. He's going to put us in a lot of good situations where we can make plays and attack offenses in all different angles. So I'm thrilled and I'm excited for it.
When you look at your strengths, and obviously being a seasoned veteran now, has been in the league for a while, your strengths, watching this Baltimore defense from afar that Macdonald had, seeing how they were using players like Pierce and trying to remember the one that had 13 sacks. Got a boot camp.
Yeah.
I don't know why I couldn't remember his name. Interviewed him at the Combine, nice guy, but how he used all those different pieces when you were exploring your free agency options. Obviously, Macdonald was somebody you've been paying attention to from afar, but from a schematic standpoint and what you've done, you've played a lot more than just nose tackle in your career. So what jumped out having watched that defense and as far as your fit goes?
For me, one thing I noticed that, for big guys as myself, he does allow them to stay out there on the field for more than just 1 or 2 downs, depending on the situation, depending on whatever he's calling. there's a lot of opportunity for guys like me, inside to be out there, even though we got a lot of pass rushers on this defense and guys that can rush at, each 3 technique, shade, in, standing up. But just giving us more opportunities to go out there and make plays and, just to impact the game.
One of the things I've really enjoyed watching since OTAs, I personally just call it the beef package, but I don't know what nickname you guys have. When Jaron Reed and Leonard Williams are standing up on the outside, and then got you and Mike Morris or Byron Murphy II playing inside. Have you guys come up with a name for that yet at this point? That's a lot of size on the defense.
I think yesterday they might have called it the Rango. I was thinking more of Track Hawk or, something with a big guy in there because, sometimes we want a little love. But, it's amazing to see Leonard, Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, sometimes me or Draymond Jones, just a combination of guys that we got that can, attack the quarterback, press the line of scrimmage and, be dominant out there. So just blessed to, be with this group of guys that I got and try to give them as much wisdom as I can and, try to, level up this defense.
You mentioned the wisdom aspect now at this stage of your career. How much have you embraced the mentorship aspect when you've got players like Byron Murphy II, Mike Morris, who's really good, at least in my opinion, these first few days of camp, having different players like that you now have the opportunity to pass on what you've learned from some of your mentors?
I enjoy it, especially when you get guys like that wants to understand and listen and learn and, not quiet about asking questions and trying to get, what's helped me get this far. I love it, man, because, when I first got into the league, I had veterans and older guys like that kind of showed me the way and taught me, things and points that I need to, continue to play a long time in this league. But it's amazing, man. Mike Murphy is going to be a dominant guy, and Big Mike's going to be a dominant guy. Overall, this organization do a pretty good job of drafting defensive linemen. So just excited to, become, a part of this organization and, hopefully make some history.
Played on some pretty good defenses in Dallas the last couple of years. Just how good do you think that this defense here could be with all the pieces that have been put together?
I think we could be just as good. Inside, I think we could be probably one of the best inside defensive tackles in the NFL with Jaron Reed, Big Murphy, Leonard Williams, Draymond Jones. We got such a different combination of guys and skill set and size-wise that can, attack guys. I think it's going to benefit us a whole lot.
As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, our latest episode on Monday, we will have takeaways from Seattle's first padded practice, offense, defense, maybe some special teams as well. Make sure that you're listening in. That'll be coming tomorrow night, most likely around 7 p.m. Pacific time. Thanks for tuning into this bonus episode and enjoy the rest of your Sunday night. Go Hawks.